This morning I'm going to summarize the five Hensho ranks of Tozan, the ranks of the relative and the absolute. And some of you are just joining these talks. For the last 7 weeks, I've been talking about these Hensho Goi, the five ranks of the relative and absolute. And the first is the absolute containing the relative. And that's kind of a stage where one experiences a dropping away of oneself, has an opening experience, but there's still something there that we're clinging to. And then the second is the relative containing the absolute, where we return to the world of form and appreciate it. But again, it's not complete. And the third rank is the absolute containing coming, which is dwelling nowhere and having nothing, seeing the absolute from a total perspective, being free from dust, just totally being one. And then the relative containing reaching, where we allow that oneness again to manifest in our life as diversity. And then the final rank, the absolute and the relative containing arriving, which goes beyond the relative and the absolute. It's just oneself as oneself, but not the same as oneself before realizing these different ranks or stages. And these ranks of Tozan, these five ranks, are often taken as the last koans that we study in our traditional set of koans, our system. And but without the insight to realize from passing through previous koans, we would not be prepared for the profound meaning of these five ranks. And each facet of your spiritual jewel will have to be polished to clarify and correlate and deepen your understanding, which was cut so laboriously and painstakingly. So Master Tozan, who wrote these five ranks, was born in the year 807 in China, and he died in 869 at the age of 62. And he was a contemporary of Master Rinzai, and Tozan is considered the founder of the Soto school, and Rinzai is the founder of the Rinzai school. And some scholars believe that the five ranks come from a verse called the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, which they attributed to Tozan, but in Tozan's records it said he learned it from his teacher in secret, Ungan Donjo, who learned it from his teacher, Yakusan Igen. So it was transmitted from teacher to student, and then finally Tozan made it publicly available. And I'm just going to read through it and make a few comments, and then maybe you'll see how this relates to these five ranks. So it starts out, the Dharma of thusness is intimately transmitted by Buddhas and ancestors. So we translate words into English like thusness and suchness and isness because the words have no translation. So what does it mean? It means everything just as it is. So we say thusness is to awaken to one's true self. So the Dharma of thusness is intimately transmitted by Buddhas and ancestors. from Shakyamuni Buddha down through 82 generations to the present day. Now you have it. Preserve it well. So, do you believe it? That you have it? So if you don't, it doesn't matter whether you have it. If you don't realize it, that's what we say. You have to realize it. The Buddha said everybody's the Buddha, but if you don't realize it, then you're not. So you have to realize it. A silver bowl filled with snow, a heron hidden in the moon. Apart they seem similar, together they're different. So this is saying that sometimes things seem different than what they are, like salt and sugar. You look at them, they look the same, but obviously once you taste them, they're very different. The mind, not resting in words, accommodates what arises. So that's like a mirror, accommodates everything. It'll reflect whatever's there, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, just reflects it without judging. Move and you're trapped. Miss and you fall into doubt and vacillation. Neither ignore nor confront it, for it's like a great ball of fire. So we say that wisdom, perfect wisdom, is like a ball of flames. It can't be grasped from any side. Just to portray it in literary form is to stain it with defilement. In darkest night, it's perfectly clear. In the light of dawn, it's hidden. So that's like the first of the ranks. It says, no wonder they meet without knowing each other. See, early in the morning before the moon shines. And so in darkest night, it's perfectly clear. See, but still hidden, there's a fascination of the earlier times. So it's a standard for all things. Its use removes all suffering. Although it takes no action, it is not without words. So we say in koan practice to use live words. Dead words don't express it. We chanted this morning in the identity of relative and absolute. It says, hearing words, you should grasp the great reality. Well, what kind of words? They're talking about the words of the Buddhas and ancestors. It should awaken you if you hear it. And quite often reading about this is what brought us to practice in the first place. Like facing a jeweled mirror, form and reflection behold each other. You are not it, but in truth it is you. I talked about this quite a bit a few weeks ago. So you are not it, but it is you. So what is that it? That's the suchness. So what are you other than it? So like a newborn child is fully endowed with 5 aspects. No going, no coming, no arising, no abiding. So the 5 characteristics of an infant are analogous to those of the Tathagata Buddha. It said that the Tathagata does not abide in the Dharma. It can't get up, it can't stay put, it can't come, it can't go away, and it can't talk. So that's like the Heart Sutra. It says no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. The same thing if you understand it. See? We have a koan that people often get confused with that says, help this old teacher get up without using your hands. So what does it mean? Play this guitar without using your hands. See, but even a newborn child is fully endowed with these 5 aspects. And so this translation says, what does a child say? Ba ba wa wa. Speaking without speaking. In the end, it says nothing, for the words are not yet right. So how much do we say where the words are not right? Ba ba wa wa. You understand? And then it says, in the hexagram, double fire phenomena and the real interact. So this hexagram, that's talking about the I-Ching. You know, some of you maybe have played around with it. You know, the hexagrams where you roll coins and they tell you your fortune or your disposition at the time. And I'm going to show some of them. In fact, let me get these out. These are hexagrams. There's 2 of them on a page here. The top one is actually the hexagram for the first of the 5 ranks, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So it's talking about these hexagrams in the I-Ching. And double fire, actually, that's the one for the 5th rank. This double fire, it's right here. It's that one. That's double fire. It's strong on the outside and strong in the center. So, double fire. We were just talking about wisdom fire. You can't approach it from any side. So it says, piled up they make 3 and the permutations make 5. Now, I tried to do a little math on this and I couldn't quite figure it out. I had actually more than 5 permutations, but anyway, there's 5 ranks, so that's what it says here. It makes 5. So like the taste of the 5-flavored herb, like the 5-pronged vajra, which is a diamond scepter, wondrously embraced within the real. The real is the absolute. Drumming and singing begin together. It says, penetrate to the root and you fathom the branches, embrace the territory and you treasure the roads. You will do well to respect this. Do not neglect it. So this is actually talking about the hexagrams, and it says, pay attention to the details. Even though you see the big picture, always pay attention to the details, you know. You might look at the territory, but you need to know where the paths are in order to traverse it. So natural and wondrous, it's not a matter of delusion or enlightenment. Within causes and conditions, time and seasons, it's serene and illuminating. So minute, it enters where there's no gap. So vast, it transcends dimension. A hair's breadth deviation and you're out of time. Now there are sudden and gradual because teachings and approaches have been set up. And then with teachings and approaches distinguished, standards arise. And it says in the identity of relative and absolute, don't cling to any standards. That's what the standards do. They just fossilize things. So, and you know what's so great about standards is there's so many of them. That's why they're not fixed. Whether teachings and approaches are mastered or not, reality constantly flows. So whether you master the teachings of a particular school, there's always reality independent of those teachings. And that's what we need to really understand. When inverted thinking stops, the affirming mind naturally accords. So if you want to follow in the ancient tracks, please consider the sages of the past. So there's one on the verge of realizing the Buddha way, contemplated under a tree for 10 kalpas. You know, kalpa is just a long period of time. And we have a koan about that, in case 9 in the Gateless Gate or the Mumonkan, where a monk asked Master Saijo Kyoyo, he said, Daitsu Chisho Buddha did zazen under a Bodhi tree for 10 kalpas. Buddha Dharma was not manifested, nor did he attain Buddhahood. Why was it? Why was it? He sat for 10 kalpas and he didn't attain Buddhahood. It's because Buddhahood is not something you attain. See, I said at the very beginning, you know, it's in the second line. Now you have it. What are you going to attain when you already have it? So with an archer's skill, ye hit the mark at 100 paces. But when arrows meet head on, how can it be a matter of skill? You know, this is kind of a Chinese legend of an archer who could hit another arrow head on coming at him. So is that a matter of skill? How could it be a matter of skill? So if it's not skill, what is it? So the wooden man starts to sing and the stone woman gets up dancing. It is not attained in thoughts or feelings, so how to reflect on it? So the wooden man singing and the stone woman dancing, that expresses how to be free from constraints. Don't be limited. Ministers serve their lords, children obey their parents. Not obeying is not filial. Failure to serve is no help. So this is very Confucian, right? Everybody performing their duty. So what is our duty? That's what they're pointing out here. So practice unobserved, function secretly like a fool, like an idiot. Just to continue in this way is called the host within the host. So the host within the host, that represents being awakened and functioning completely from the awakened state. But it says practicing unobserved. See, that means you're not shiny and bright and draw attention to yourself. So that's what it's emphasizing. So let's look at these hexagrams a little bit. So the first one is the relative within the absolute. And that's a double hexagram of the wind upon the wind. And this is it here. This is the wind trigram above the wind trigram. This is the first state. But it says in the I-Ching, for under this hexagram, it says that it really means subtle penetrating, like the wind penetrates. It's not like last week where we constantly had these winds, that were blowing things over, but it's a subtle penetrating, and it gently penetrates to the core. That's what it says. Finding the base from which things arise, or the source. And it lets you acquire a place from which you can influence the world you live in. So this paragraph there, this hexagram says, to penetrate to the core and find the hidden disorder and awaken your inner wisdom. And it says, do not impose a solution. It's just to awaken yourself. That's what this hexagram is saying. And it says, adapt like the persuasive power of the wind. And in nature, it's the wind that disperses the clouds of delusion, leaving the sky clear and serene. And in human life, it's a penetrating clarity that thwarts all darkness and hidden motives. And in the life of the community, it's a powerful influence. Of a great personality that uncovers and breaks up those intrigues which shun the light of day. So one of the penetrating qualities of the wind is that it depends on ceaselessness. Ceaselessness, that means continuity, being continuous in your practice. I was just talking to somebody today about when your mind wanders off, you have to be ruthless. Bring it back to the core, to the center. Just keep bringing it. It's not as interesting or as exciting as whatever fantasy you've conjured up in your mind, but it's ceaseless, like the gentle wind, just constantly coming back, constantly coming back. And it produces gradual and inconspicuous effects. And its influence never lapses. And the results of this kind are less striking to the eye than those won by a surprise attack, but they're more enduring and more complete. So that's the relative within the absolute. The absolute within the relative is another double hexagram, but it's a one of water, of joyousness and the lake. It's this one on the bottom here. You see it has two hexagrams exactly the same, but it's the inverse of the one above. If you look at it, the one above has two solid lines and a dashed line, and this one has a dashed line and then two solid lines. Okay. And that's a double lake, is symbolized by a smiling lake, and its attribute is joy, joyfulness. And that's, bringing the awareness of the absolute into your world of form, into the world of phenomena. And true joy rests on a firmness and strength within, manifesting itself outwardly as yielding and gentle. But also joy has to be based on steadfastness. And so this advice in this hexagram is to express yourself, make an offering, and you will succeed. And this hexagram reveals innate forms, the true nature of forms. See, in the first one of the relative within the absolute, that's the stage where we said mountains are not mountains, where before practicing mountains are mountains, when I had realization mountains are not mountains. And then here in the second one, mountains are mountains again. So it reveals innate forms, but in a way where you can clarify what they're really about. They're based on emptiness. So inner self-reflection on this hexagram gives you the ability to express the spirit, your spirit in the human community. In other words, you can bring this into the Sangha. So these two form a kind of a pair, as I showed you. They're kind of opposites. And there's a transformative process in these pairs, subtle penetration and opening to joy develop the insight to release hidden suffering and the capacity to express the spirit in the human community. Now, when we get to the third one, let's see, where are we? The third one is the water above and the wind below. Okay, and the third one is coming from the absolute, and so that's this one on the top. It has the water above and the wind below, and you see that it has two broken bars on the top and the bottom and four solid bars in the middle. So this is, it's very strong in the center, but it's kind of weak on the outside. And this this absolute, is the state, where you clearly see the nature of the absolute, the emptiness. But why is it weak on the outside? There's a koan that we have where a monk asked a master, when the teachers of old attained the great reality, why did they not remain there? In other words, when you have a big awakening experience, why not just stay there? And that's what this is talking about. And the reason you don't stay there, and his answer was, because there's no power in the way. That's where you see clearly, but you're not functioning yet. And that's why it's weak on the outside. It's strong, really strong on the inside, but weak on the outside. So this particular hexagram is great transition. That's what it means, great transition. So it symbolizes a critical passage, a moment of truth. And you need to stand alone without fear and step out of your conventional ideas. And it says this is a critical situation. The structure of your life is in danger, but there's a creative force at work in this breakdown. In other words, everything is just falling down. That's where we say there's no firm earth upon which to stand, not even a square inch of ground. And then the advice is don't listen to conventional thinking. This is a time of change that recharges experience with meaning and energy. And your best answers will be intuitive and spontaneous and flow naturally from the need. So they don't stay here because there's no power in the way. And so the next one is arriving from the relative. And that's the other. It has the wind above and the lake below. And if you look at this, it has two strong lines on the outside, and on the inside it has the broken lines. So that's the one down here, two strong lines and the broken lines in the middle. So that's the wind blows over the lake, and the visible effects of the invisible manifest. So a heart is a heart free of prejudice and open to truth. So in the one before, the arriving, coming from the absolute, it says that this condition must pass or misfortune arises. It's strong on the inside and weak on the outside. Now, this one is strong on the outside, but weak on the inside. But it's connected to the center. It's open-hearted. It's open in the middle. But it's firm, but it's open in the middle. Maybe weak wasn't the right word. So the last one is double fire, unity attained or arriving within for both of them. And this is the hexagram, a double fire. And you see it has strength on the outside and on the inside, and then transition. Yeah. This is the one that's talked about in the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, the double fire, preponderance of fire. Yeah. So fire has no definite form, but clings to objects and is bright and it's radiant. So this particular hexagram is radiance or visionary. It illuminates darkness. And this says, the advice, it's let go of the past and brighten all that's hidden. And take care of your base, and it will take care of you. Your base, what's that? Your core. So the 10,000 dharmas advance and realize the self. That's from Genjo Koan. So this fire is formless, but it illuminates objects. And in this stage, in this hexagram, you create the circumstances to make everything light, to illuminate the darkness. And through clarity, this light spreads and penetrates. So that's what the double fire hexagram represents. I remember the Maizumi Roshi talking about illuminating the darkness. He said that darkness is really just the absence of light. I was thinking about there's these caves in the center of the earth that probably have never seen light for 10 billion years. And if you go in there with a match, you can dispel the darkness, even of a 10 million year old darkness. But he said even the glow on a stick of incense will give you a little bit of illumination. So then a light and then a flashlight or torch, so eventually you can see more and more. And that's what this hexagram represents. So that's one way to look at them. And I'm going to quickly go through a couple of other ways. When Bernie Glassman and I studied these 5 ranks together before he died. And he wanted to use the tenets of the peacemakers in order to reframe these 5 ranks. And one of the tenets is to bear witness to the joys and sufferings of the world without judgment, without preconditions. And so the first one, the absolute containing the relative, he said, what about the absolute bearing witness to the relative? I don't know how the absolute bears witness, but he liked that. But there's another way that I was mapping these 5 ranks, and that's to the words in the Genjo Koan of Dogen, which are to study, the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas. And to be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas is to free one's body and mind and those of others, and then no trace of enlightenment remains. So the first one, to study the Buddha ways, to study the self, is just getting started. And then the absolute containing the relative, or the absolute bearing witness to the relative, is to study the self, is to forget the self. That's that rank, you forget the self. And then the relative containing the absolute is, Bernie liked relative bearing witness to the absolute. But if Dogen would say to forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas. So if you can forget your attachment to your own ego, then everything in your life enlightens you. That's the second rank. Then the third one, the absolute containing coming, Bernie like bearing witness to the absolute, just being in the absolute state. And then Dogen said to be enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas is to free one's body and mind and those of others. In other words, to let go of any attachment we have to body and mind, and to the body and mind of others as well. And then the fourth one is a relative containing reaching. And again, Bernie's there is bearing witness to the relative. And Dogen said, no trace of enlightenment remains. In other words, you're in the world without attaching to anything. And then the fifth one is the absolute and the relative containing arriving. And Bernie said, just bearing witness to life itself. Because I said, this is beyond the relative and the absolute. And what is beyond the relative and the absolute but your life itself? How do you define it? Is it relative or absolute? It's just your life. And Dogen said, this traceless enlightenment is continued forever. And that's the last part of it. So that's another way to look at it. And then when I was studying this, I came up with even another way. Because Hakuin, in his commentaries on these 5 ranks, he correlated them with the 5 wisdom energies, the 5 Buddha wisdom. And he said the first one, the absolute within the relative, is a great, perfect mirror wisdom, or mirror-like wisdom. And a few months ago, Mui talked about the 5 Buddha families, and each of these wisdoms corresponds to a family. And this one corresponds to Vajra, or clarity, the first one. So it reflects what it sees without bias, both the Vajra energy and the great perfect mirror wisdom. And when people manifest the wisdom aspect of Vajra, they're clear-minded, with an intelligence, intellectual brilliance, sharpness, and precision. And they maintain a perspective and are full of integrity. So that's the first one. And he said, if you understand the great, Hakuin said, if you understand the great perfect mirror wisdom, you'll understand this rank. And the second one is the universal nature wisdom, or the wisdom of equanimity. And that's the absolute within the relative. And that's Ratna, richness or creativity. See, so the first one is emptiness, and then we're back to form again, so we're more creative. And the Ratna energy, the wisdom encompasses and enriches everything. It displays equanimity and satisfaction. And when people are manifest with the wisdom aspect of Ratna, they're expansive, creative, resourceful, hospitable, and appreciative. Of course, there's neurotic sides to all this too, but we're just talking about the uplifting aspects. And then coming from within the absolute is a marvelous observing wisdom, or discriminating wisdom, and that's Padma, which is passion. And it's a finely tuned intuition that discriminates subtle experiences without bias. And when people manifest this, they're engaging, magnetizing, and charming. And this energy listens deeply and speaks from the heart. And that's the absolute. It's the marvelous observing wisdom, or discriminating wisdom. And then arriving within the relative is the perfection of action wisdom, or all-accomplishing wisdom. And that's karma, activity. And it's energetic and swift. It's all-accomplishing for the benefit of others. And when people who exhibit the positive aspects of karma, they're efficient, effective, practical, full of confident energy. They act in timely and appropriate ways, in synchronicity with the world. And then the last one is arriving within together or unity attained. And that's the wisdom of all pervading space, or that's the Buddha wisdom, Buddha energy. And the Buddha family or Buddha energy is spacious and peaceful. It's all pervasive. And this energy manifests as receptivity, accommodation, easygoing, and contentment with just being. So it's important to realize that each one of these stages or ranks contain all the others. The 5 ranks of the relative and absolute contain each other, and they're not a circular path, they're more like a spiral path, because you never end up at the same place as you practice through them. And all of these 5 wisdom energies that I talked about, they appear in each stage and they evolve with new insight. It's not like you can I was just mapping them one-to-one because that's what Hakuin did with the wisdoms, but you find aspects of all of it in all of the rest of them. So it's important to realize. So intrinsically, each one of us is complete. There's nothing lacking, nothing extra. So all of these different aspects manifest in each one of us. But intrinsically, it's just the way we are. But we have to realize it, and that's an important part of our practice, and that's why we emphasize practice. Because without realizing it, we're like a hollow echo. So please, just take these, whatever you can out of this talk, and then let it go. And just let it penetrate into your practice. So starting next time, I'm going to talk about another series of 5 ranks that came from Tozan. And they're called the Kokan Goi, which is like an ascending Goi, like the 10 ox herding pictures. And so for now, let's just continue our practice session, and I'll end here.